So thank you again for being here. I want to talk about Mara and how to find or how to recognize Mara in our lives, or how to understand what Mara is. And Mara, in traditionally in Buddhism, in Buddhist teachings, Mara is kind of the personification of the defilements of greed and hatred and delusion, and shows up in many guises. And Mara is often talked about as he, but my sister-in-law is named Mara, so I often say she, and I don't think it matters. It actually doesn't matter. Mara is just a more of a concept, and the stories create the idea that he's a person, a guy person, but not necessarily. So just Mara is whatever, however it shows up in your life. And as I mentioned, there was a at the BIPOC and Allies group last Sunday at Meditation Coalition. The person who gave the talk gave this really wonderful talk on Mara, and kind of reframed it in a lot of ways, and really was inspirational for me. And I thought about it quite a lot over the week, and so I was inspired to put together this little talk about Mara. And I'm going to reference, his name was John Salunga, Salunga, and I'm going to and he's a student, he studies in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, and I am going to reference some of the questions he posed, which I think are really beneficial and helpful. But first, I wanted to give a little background about Mara. And Mara has a lot in the discourses, in the suttas. Mara has a lot of names, like Lord of Unskillfulness. I remember that one he mentioned on Sunday. I wrote it down. Lord of Unskillfulness, or the Imposer of Limits, or the Lord of the Sensual Realm, the Tempter, the Evil One, or the Principle of Destruction, or the entirety of conditioned existence, meaning that place of conditioning, that we're just driven by the causes and conditions of our life without awareness of what's going on. It's being trapped in samsara. So not necessarily a positive. None of these are really quite positive, or even partially positive, these names. So Mara is, again, as I said, this idea of being trapped in what's not working, what's not skillful, what's not wise, what's kind of caught with a lot of delusion. And throughout the text, I got a lot of this piece from some writings in Access to Insight about Mara and the different suttas, and how Mara shows up in, and I'll call Mara they. I think it's comfortable for me to say that. Mara shows up as an anthropomorphic deity, kind of personified. Mara shows up as a class of deities. As I said, the personification of death, as an allegory, the power of temptation, the tendency to do evil, the tendency to have moral conflict, often seen, often equated with the devil in Christian or Islamic traditions or thought. Mara shows up as the tempter of the Buddha, like showing with dancing girls. It's especially the famous story is on the night of his enlightenment, where Mara is really annoyed with the Buddha's verge of awakening, and throws all kinds of things at the Buddha, tempting him or attacking him. And Mara and Buddha's just like, dude, I see this. I see you. I see what's going on here. And Mara dissipates. Buddha also gets in the way of, Mara also gets in the way of the Buddha's teachings by making noise, like being troublesome, like a troublemaker, breaking things, disrupting sermons. And he comes to the Buddha in various guises. Like, this is what's very relatable for me, like doubt, anxiety, longing, but the Buddha recognizes them there too. So it's not, the Buddha didn't just show up that one night on the Buddha's awakening, and then the Buddha said, I recognize you, I see you for what you are. Mara came to the Buddha throughout his life, including on his deathbed, and or close to the end of his life, and I'll get to that later as well. And whenever the Buddha recognizes that Mara is present, and Buddha says, I see you, Mara, Mara walks away despondent, glum. And there's one quote that says, Mara is sitting there and scraping the ground with a stick. And it reminds me like of a 5-year-old who is rebuked and just sits there with this pouty thing in their stick, and they're just like, meh. That's kind of how Mara walks away every time the Buddha says, I see you for what you are. You can't trick me. And so it's this common theme. The defilements continually arise, and Buddha continuously says, I see you. I see you. And so that's kind of how that's how Mara shows up in the text. And with this talk on Sunday, I don't remember if he mentioned it, but what came up for me was that this whole idea of Mara is storytelling, and it's how we get through life with stories to make sense of things. And it's actually how the brain operates. The brain creates stories to give us shortcuts, so we don't have to process something over and over and over and reinvent the wheel every time we do something. We have these shortcuts, we have these stories, we have this recognition that happens. And so this is a story about Mara, and I like to see seeing Mara as a story is a reframing of the defilements, which we talk about all the time. Where's your greed? Where's your hatred? Where's the ignorance? Where is this? But what John suggested doing, and I think is a really excellent idea, he talked about a spiritual biography, which he used the word namtar, which is a Tibetan word. It's a contraction of 2 words, namhar tarpa, which means complete liberation. So it's this journey to spiritual enlightenment. It's the story of our life. So it's taking our life, but creating a story with this particular lens. And the lens is how the defilements, how Mara shows up in our life. How we recognize Mara, and how we work with Mara to not be entangled or trapped by Mara, by being tangled and trapped by those things. And it's a path to liberation, because Mara gets in the way of our enlightenment. And when we're not paying attention, and often just out of the gate, we're kind of caught we're entrapped by Mara. We're entrapped by greed, hatred, and delusion because of our causes, because of our conditioning, because of what the stories we believe about the way things are supposed to be, and the stories we believe about how you should be and how the world should be, and whether it's going the way we want it to go or not. We are just caught up in these ideas. And so what we want to recognize is, how do we move through the world with or without Mara? And some of the questions that he asked, these are some of the questions that John's asked on Sunday, was how does Mara manifest in our personal life and through our habits? What habits do we have that are the personification of Mara? And what stories or beliefs drive our actions? And some of the things, like we were talking about in one of the suttas, or talking about how Mara shows up for the Buddha, doubts, anxieties, longing. What stories do we tell ourselves? What things have come up around, that we're not good enough, or we don't fit in, or we're on the outside looking in? Those deeply held beliefs sometimes that we see and that are so real. And can we say, oh, is this Mara? Is this delusion? Is this craving? I'm never going to get what I need. I'm never going to have what I want, this longing. So begin to look at those stories that show up, and can I reframe them and say, oh, look at this. This is Mara. Because so often when we can name it as what it is, instead of thinking it's part of how we move through the world, like this, like it's true, like I'm not good enough. I'll never have X, Y, or Z. It's really painful. But if we can shift it and shift how we look at it and shift that lens by which we view it, then it can maybe lose its hold on us. It doesn't make it less painful, but there's a chance that we can find some ways to work with it. Another question he asked are, what are my triggers, or what's my reactivity? What does it look like? What comes up for me, is it fight, flight, or freeze? I'm a fleer and a freezer. I rarely fight, but what's my go-to mechanism? What's my go-to reactivity when these things come up? Can I identify that as Mara, as getting in the way of my liberation? If something comes up that I don't like, if I have to face a situation that I find a little concerning, that I don't think it'll turn out in my best interest, there's a tendency to, like, I'm just going to go over here, or I'm going to figure out a way to make it work. I'm going to pound it into a different shape. I'm going to manage and control. Recognizing those types of tendencies as being caught up in some type of craving for some particular outcome, instead of being able to be with the situation and say, right now it's like this. So watching our reactivity, defining the way we react to things. And how am I aligned with Mara? Sometimes I'm not ready to let go. I know folks who practice, are Buddhist practitioners, but also say, you know what? Not this one. This is righteous anger, or something that they are going to hold on to because it serves them in some way. And you see that with different things in your life that maybe you struggle to let go of. And it's like, why can't I let go of this? And to perhaps say, maybe because it serves me in some way. And so maybe looking at that as being aligned with Mara. Oh, maybe that is true. And to recognize that. Sometimes we're just not ready to let go of things. And then we broaden the scope of what Mara looks like. It's not just greed or hatred or delusion, but it's like things that get in our way of waking up. And then, of course, what does Mara look like in the society around us? And that's not very hard to see. We see the oppression. We see the racism, misogyny, homophobia. We see this systemic injustices. We see the economic disparities and the injustices that are all over the place. And that's the world in the grip of Mara, in the grip of greed, in the grip of hatred, in the grip of massive ignorance, willing ignorance, intentional ignorance, spreading ignorance. So seeing that Mara is just as usual, running through the world, just kind of grasping on, and it's there. So I think it's important to define Mara in our lives. And it can be simple. It can be as simple as impatience, not willing to stand on line. It can be me I've talked about this before, me being incredibly annoyed with all the people that park on my street, and only because I know they're going to the gun store around the corner, and I have a judgment about that.
Mm.
And if they were just people parking in front of my house, I wouldn't care, but I know what they're doing and where they're going. So I feel this righteousness coming up, and I've actually been a little snarky to them, which is like, I don't have to be that way, but I'm coming from this place of judgment. I mean, it can be that simple. Oh, that's Mara showing up. That's Mara leading me away from this place of freedom, of really fully letting go of judgment, of anger, of aversion. Or Mara can be huge. We can have something like, we can have violent behavior in our lives. We can be caught in addictive behavior. So Mara can be really small. It can be along the spectrum. So recognizing Mara in our lives, what does that look like? Because it gets in the way, as I keep saying, it gets in the way of our enlightenment. It gets in the way of our freedom. It's not to suppress it, but to recognize it and understand it, see it for what it is. We don't want to suppress these things, push them down and go, la, 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 you know, bypass them, but actually greet it, see it, feel it. What is this like? How does this show up in my life? And begin to recognize Mara's guises in our life. And the other important thing that we have to do, and John's pointed this out as well, is he says we have to build a foundation, a dharmic foundation. Or what's my foundation? Where do I stand when Mara shows up? What's my stance? Do I have a way to respond which keeps me grounded? Do I have a wise way to respond? To respond, not react. You know, what supports me? What supports us as we take our seat? You know, and it's for me, and I know for a lot of people, it's these teachings. It's the Eightfold Path. It's the Four Noble Truths. It's the precepts. Because when I'm faced with something, I can either be enmeshed, entangled in Mara, and like, I want, it should, you should, they should, la, 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 la. And it's incredibly painful to operate from that place. Or coming back to this teaching, it's like, what's the wise thing to do? What's the compassionate thing to do? What's not going to cause harm? For me, wise speech is huge. It's a huge place for me. Or the precepts. It's like, what is this going to cause harm? Is this going to take me away from suffering or towards suffering? So the practice is to center this dharmic narrative, center our ground. I often think of these teachings as a net, you know, for a trapeze artist. It's like that net. So if you fall off the trapeze, there's some place to land. You know, once we start taking away these old stories, it does feel a little, where do I go? What do I do? How do I show up these days? And these teachings can offer that way. It's like, what would you do in this situation? Oh, maybe I should pause. Maybe I should reflect. And one of the stories around the Buddha's awakening, when Mara was going after him and saying, you know, at one point Mara said, who do you think you are? Basically, the story is Mara said, who do you think you are? And the Buddha said, basically he said, I am. You know, the earth is my witness. I don't need anything else but to just be, which is the beauty of these teachings. You know, and there's the famous pose when you see a lot of Buddhist statues where he's got his left hand like this and his right hand touching the earth. I think this It's hard to see this little person, but this little statue, he's got the left hand in his lap and the right hand um, down. I remember the first time I heard that story, and it just sent shudders through my body, because there was always a needing to justify, needing to tick off a bunch of boxes in order to be okay. But this practice says just being a human being, just because the earth is your witness, you don't have to prove anything. That's a foundation that I utilize. It's like, it's sometimes not easy to get there because there's so much conditioning in the way, but ultimately that's a ground also to operate from. So it's important to recognize what Mara looks like and to recognize what your ground is and how you are going to be able to show up when you're in the midst of these things that are pulling you a million miles in different directions. And there's a couple of examples from the suttas that I want to offer of Mara, what Mara shows up as, and then how the Buddha identifies the Mara. There's one point, again, it's I think around the time of the Buddha's enlightenment, and Mara's coming to the Buddha and saying, oh, you're thin and you're pale and poor you. Life is better if you come this way. Come live the holy life and stop your struggling. But Buddha recognizes it's Mara, and Buddha says, he calls out all the things that Mara is. And the squadron of his armies. Your squadron is sense desires. Your second squadron is boredom, then hunger, then thirst and craving. The fifth is sloth and torpor, cowardice, uncertainty, malice paired with obstinacy, gain, honor, renown, ill-won notoriety, self-praise, and denigrating others. These are your squadrons. So the Buddha's naming how Mara shows up in all these different ways: cowardice, self-praise, denigrating others. Unpleasant. And then there's another piece which is in Living with the Devil, which is by a great book by Stephen Batchelor. What is it? A Meditation on Good and Evil, and talks a lot about Mara in here. But again, it is toward the end of Mara's life, toward the end of the Buddha's life, when his cousin was trying to kill him and threw a big boulder down a hill, and the boulder didn't hit the Buddha, but some shrapnel from the rock was struck his foot and caused bodily feelings that were painful, sharp, piercing, harrowing, and disagreeable. So the Buddha lay down on the ground to recover from his injuries, and immediately Mara showed up and said, oh, judging mind. Oh, you lie down, or do you lie down in a daze, or are you drunk on poetry? Don't you have things to do? Basically, that's what it says. Oh, lazy, don't you have things to do? Why do you dream away intent on sleep? And it was the mocking voice of self-doubt. But what the Buddha responded was, I lie down out of compassion for beings. And Mara vanished at once. So this teaching of compassion as well. It's like the Mara was coming to the Buddha all the time in all these places. Self-doubt, questioning, but the Buddha recognized and said, I'm here for compassion. So to find that place, and these practices give us the tools to build compassion, the Brahma Viharas, the heart practices, the compassion for self, the precepts, not just don't cause harm, but develop compassion for others. Don't just not take what's not yours, but develop generosity, letting go of craving. It's really all these ways that we move through the world, identifying what gets in the way of our freedom. And so find the tools that will work for you, stories, phrases, the great old story of Milarepa fighting the demons, or Thich Nhat Hanh talks about seeds of consciousness, you know, little parables that you can go to. Right now it's like this. That's my favorite. That's my go-to. And it's not just Buddhist practice. Sometimes it's therapy or other methods that we need to help us work with those deep conditionings that we have that can cause so much discomfort, or that are so challenging. And recognize it takes some time. In Philip Moffat's book, Dancing with Life, he talks about, you know, the different insights. There's the intellectual understanding of, okay, I understand this in an intellectual way. And then there's the beginning of recognition internally, seeing, oh, that's what that was yesterday when I got so caught up in anger. That was Mara, that was my inability to be with what the person was saying, and I had to react in a particular way. And then there gets to a place where it's fully embodied and you move through the world just aware of it in the moment. So it's a journey that we take with these teachings, but the invitation to name Mara in your own life, I think, is really really helpful, and helpful for me anyway. So thank you, my friends, for your kind attention.